When we look back at history, it's easy to remember the big names, right? The visionaries, the famous faces on the currency. But what about the builders? You know, the people who actually rolled up their sleeves and turned all those grand ideas into something real. Well, today, we're diving into the story of one of those absolutely crucial but often overlooked heroes, Oliver Wolcott Jr. I mean, let's really think about that for a second. What does it actually take to build a country from scratch? It's definitely not just about winning a war or signing a fancy declaration. It's about the nitty-gritty stuff, designing tax forms, setting up accounting systems, all the thankless work that makes a government actually function.
And Wolcott's story starts with a real bang. Picture this, it's 1776. The revolution is really starting to heat up. A crowd in New York City goes and tears down this huge lead statue of King George III. And family legend has it that a 16-year-old kid from Connecticut was right there in the thick of it, helping to melt that thing down into 40,000 bullets for the Continental Army. I mean, talk about turning a symbol of oppression into actual resistance.
And that teenager was, you guessed it, Oliver Wolcott Jr. His father actually signed the Declaration of Independence, so you could say public service was basically the family business. This one act of teenage rebellion really kicked off a 40-year career dedicated not just to fighting for America, but to actually building it, piece by tedious piece.
So, Wolcott's first big job took him right into the heart of the new nation's single biggest problem: money, or the lack of it. He ended up at the U.S. Treasury, the one department that just had to work if the country was going to have any chance of surviving.
Now, we've all heard of Alexander Hamilton, right? The genius, the visionary, the architect of the whole American financial system. But what happens when the architect leaves the project? Well, George Washington appointed Wolcott to take over for Hamilton, and that's where we see his unique role really take shape. He wasn't the guy with the grand vision, he was the builder, the one whose job it was to make Hamilton's blueprint a working reality.
And listen, this was not simple bookkeeping. You got to think of it like a startup. Hamilton was the founder, with the brilliant world-changing idea. Wolcott, he was the first COO. He was the one who came in and actually built the internal systems, the protocols, the paperwork, the operational machinery that let the whole thing function day to day. Without that nuts and bolts work, Hamilton's vision would have just been an idea on a piece of paper.
But of course, building a nation isn't just about spreadsheets and org charts. The early American Republic was a political minefield, and Wolcott was about to step right into an explosion that would test his integrity to the absolute breaking point. So by 1800, the political atmosphere was just toxic. The Federalists were on their way out, and the Jeffersonians were coming in hot. And right in the middle of this partisan war, Wolcott's enemies hit him with this absolutely wild accusation that he had personally set fire to the State Department building. It was total nonsense, but in that kind of political climate, mud sticks, so he resigned in protest. But he was not about to let his reputation be destroyed by a lie.
And what he did next? Well, this really tells you everything you need to know about his character. He didn't just quietly disappear. Oh no, he demanded a full congressional investigation into his entire time in office. To put that in modern terms, that's like a CEO in the middle of a huge scandal, demanding a complete public forensic audit of the company's books. It was a huge risk, but it paid off. The investigation completely, totally cleared his name. It was a masterclass in integrity.
Vindicated, but probably pretty exhausted, Wolcott left the national stage. His career as a public servant, though, was far from over. He packed his bags and went back home to Connecticut, where a whole new chapter was about to begin.
Wolcott came home a changed man. That brutal partisan warfare in Washington had completely soured him on the Federalist Party he'd served his whole life. But instead of just retiring, he decided to build something new, right there at home. He saw a chance to shake up the old, dusty political order in Connecticut and put together a new coalition for reform.
They called themselves the Toleration Party. And it was this fascinating mashup of his old political enemies, the Democratic Republicans, other disillusioned Federalists like himself, basically anyone who thought Connecticut's government was stuck in the 17th century. And their main goals were genuinely radical for that time and place, especially in New England. They wanted a total separation of church and state, and they wanted to rewrite the state's entire rulebook.
This whole reform movement just caught fire, and in 1817 it swept Oliver Wolcott Jr. right into the governor's office. Now he was in charge, and he set his sights on his most ambitious building project yet, tearing down the state's old colonial framework and creating a modern constitution from the ground up. To really get how big a deal this was, you have to remember Connecticut's nickname, the Constitution State. Their history of written government goes all the way back to 1639. The problem?
By the 1800s, they were still running the state based on a royal charter from King Charles II, granted in 1662. It was an antique, a relic from a time before the United States even existed. It was way, way past time for an upgrade.
And you can just see the massive changes right here on this chart. Look at the before and after. Under the old charter, your Texas supported one official church. The 1818 Constitution, bam! Separation of church and state. The old government was totally dominated by the legislature. The new one, 3 co-equal branches, just like the federal government. And crucially, it expanded voting rights. Wolcott wasn't just making a few tweaks, he was fundamentally rebuilding how the state worked.
And you know what? The people of Connecticut were thrilled. How do we know? They re-elected him 9 times. He served for a full decade as governor. That is a crystal clear mandate for his steady, effective, and forward-thinking leadership.
So when you look at Wolcott's entire career from start to finish, it's defined by this quiet, steadfast service. He was never going to be the loudest guy in the room or the face on the monument. He was the quiet architect, the guy working on the foundations, making sure the building would actually stand.
So his legacy is really twofold. On the national level, he's the guy who built the actual working machinery of the U.S. Treasury. On the state level, he built a modern government for Connecticut. But the foundation for all of that, the thing that made it all possible, was his character, an absolutely unshakable integrity that held up under the most intense political attacks imaginable.
Which brings us right back to where we started. The story of Oliver Wolcott Jr. really forces you to ask, what's the true measure of a legacy? Is it the person with the grand vision? Or is it the person who does the steadfast, patient, and absolutely essential work of making that vision real?